Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, April the 29th. U.S. history class. We're talking about the presidency of Richard Nixon today. You should have an attachment. It's going to look like this. And I'd like to run through that with you real quick. Richard Nixon is associated as our first president of the 1970s, and that's the decade we begin to tackle. So just going to focus on a few highlights on him. I'll try to go through these pretty quick. So here we go. First of all, President Nixon is elected in 1968. He is the second president who really has to take on the Vietnam War. He is going to be reelected in 1972. He's going to resign from office in 1974. He was probably going to be impeached. Didn't want to go through the embarrassment of that, so he resigns, and we'll talk about that in a moment. He is a Republican president. When he begins the presidency, economically, we're great. Vietnam is not going so great, but that's what he has ahead of him. So let's look at these key terms. Number one, Nixon is known at times to be an imperial president, I-M-P-E-R-I-A-L, an imperial president, because some felt like he maybe abused. Several presidents can be accused of this, by the way, but he is accused of abusing his power as president. There's certain things he's supposed to do, get consent of Congress first. For instance, he bombed Laos and Cambodia. We're at war with Vietnam, but he bombed Laos and Cambodia without congressional approval. That went against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, giving the president permission to fight Vietnam. So he also used public funds for private measures. And he kept a secret enemies list, which isn't an abuse of power, but it's just kind of strange. He was a kind of a paranoid guy, but he did keep that list of people who were on the bad list. So a little unusual in that. Again, some people believe Nixon was a great president. He does great things, some great things. Some believe he was a horrible president. And we don't spend enough time for you to maybe get a really good idea of that, but I try to at least expose you to a little bit. Number two is OPEC, O-P-E-C. OPEC stands for the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, made up of 13 countries, mostly from the Middle East. Historically controlled most oil production in the world. They are still around today. They don't have the strength they once did, at least not over America, because we're now mostly energy independent thanks to fracking. Most of these countries back then are not friendly to America. So more on them in just a moment. So number three is the Arab oil ban. The Arab oil ban. Arab, A-R-A-B, oil, and then ban, a ban or an embargo. So OPEC is going to they're going to cut off sale of oil to America for a while in the 70s. They do this because of, you can read with me, number three. The Arab oil ban, number three, is as a result of United States support and aid to Israel, which is an ally to America. But Israel is hated by most of these Arab and Muslim nations. So because we support them, Israel that is, the Arab Muslim nations cut off oil to America, a la OPEC, beginning an oil and gas shortage in America throughout the 1970s. And immediately when this happened, the price of oil goes up, quadruples, 4 times. So, number four, the gas and oil crisis. Number four, the gas and oil crisis here in America. Because of number three and the ban on oil sales here, the price for a gallon of gas in 1974 went from 50 cents a gallon as high as $4 a gallon. So guys, we're talking about $4 a gallon in the 1970s. If you adjust this for inflation between $2 and $4 a gallon back then to now, that'd be like spending somewhere between $7 to $13 a gallon for a gallon of gas. Can you imagine paying $10 a gallon for gas wherever you go get gas, you and your family? That's pretty crazy. So number four, you can fill in those things. Be like $7 to $16 or $13 for a gallon of gas in 2020. Okay, let's keep on a rolling. So, we have this really great economy after, we had the Great Depression, then World War II hits, and then from the end of World War II all the way to about 1971 or 2-ish, our economy does pretty well, but then there's three reasons why our economy is really in the pits throughout most of the 1970s. And those three reasons are all things that you have heard before. The number one are letter A. Number 5, letter A. The three reasons our economy really struggles. A is the oil and gas crisis that we have just talked about. So the oil gas crisis is number 1. Letter B is the expense of the Vietnam War. It cost a lot of money to put 500,000 people, 8,000 miles away fighting a war. So number 1, again, the oil and gas crisis. Number 2, the expense of the Vietnam War. And your third reason is the expense of the Great Society, which, remember, that was the goal by the president, to end poverty. And those programs create government programs that are very expensive. And so taxes go up, and that hurts people spending their money, and it is going to hurt our economy and our businesses. Remember, typically lower taxes mean people spend more, which helps businesses grow. That's not happening in the 1970s. Number 6 is the big one, the Watergate scandal. Watergate, name of a hotel. Now remember, President Nixon, so let me give you the background. President Nixon was a Republican. In 1972, he's running for presidency again. The scandal occurs when there's 5 men who broke into the Democratic National Headquarters, which happened to be at the Watergate Hotel. That's why it's called Watergate. Okay, so these 5 guys secretly go into the Democratic Party headquarters one night, and they bug the place so they can secretly listen to conversations of what the Democrats are doing concerning the presidential election. Okay, well, they get caught, and then people ask the president, "Hey, what'd you know about this?" And the president says, "I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know these guys were doing this." Turns out the president lied. Later, on tape, the president was, there's the evidence. The president is on tape saying that he knew that these guys did this. So that makes him look very bad. And so as a result, the ethics of that is very questionable. So as a result of all that, he, rather than go through impeachment, because he was going to be impeached and kicked out, he resigned. Okay, so that is the, and you've got a good video, you've got a good link there. It's a really quick version of what the Watergate trial was about. So you can watch that. You'll need to watch that when we finish up. Okay, there is a second link there you can watch on, it's about the oil crisis in America. It's pretty short. It's really good. It's in New York City. The gas shortage was such a big deal in the 70s. There were times, heck, I remember being in these lines, but there would be lines that were like a quarter mile long. You'd wait in just to get gas. And so you can watch that there on your own. Matter of fact, I don't have time to go into it on this video. So moving on, here we go. Number 7, some good things under the under Nixon's presidency. Number 7 is the EPA. The EPA was created in 1970, which stands for the Environmental Protection Agency. The goal is pretty simple: clean air, clean water. Number 7, EPA. Number 8, the Endangered Species Act is passed, and this is to protect plants and species, animals that are in danger of extinction. Number 9, Supreme Court case, Tinker versus Des Moines. That's Des Moines, Iowa. Des Moines, D-E-S-M-O-I-N-E-S. So in Tinker versus Des Moines, John Tinker was against the Vietnam War. He's a high school student. He's living in Bible Belt Midwest. He wears a black armband to school in protest of the war. He gets told he needs to take that off because him protesting the war was not acceptable in the school setting according to that school in Des Moines, Iowa. Well, the case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sides with the student, John Tinker, saying you can wear that armband because it's a freedom of expression, which is part of your First Amendment rights. So they upheld his right to wear the band in protest, even though a lot of people there did not agree with that. So, okay, so number 10 is a French word that we're going to use, and it describes Nixon's foreign policy. The word is called détente, D-E-T-E-N-T-E, détente. D-E-T-E-N-T-E. It's a French word. It means to relax tension, all right, or release tension, release anxiety, release whatever word you want to use there. So, as we know, in the 1970s, the Cold War continues, okay? Us versus communism, us versus Russia, us versus China now, because now China is communist as well. Well, détente, okay? And by the way, you can write down with number 11, write down U.S. versus China, please, okay? Number 11, U.S. versus China. All right. So détente was the goal of Nixon with China and Russia. He's the first president. How does he do this? Well, he's the first president to actually recognize China as a nation. He's the first president to go visit China. He actually goes over. That was a big deal, guys, because we saw them as a very evil place, and he goes there anyway. And he goes there to just show as a measure of goodwill, hey, we can get along, is basically what he was going for. And also it was to open up economically so we could have better relations with trading with each other, which helps them and helps us, okay? We even send our ping pong team over there to play, which also was a sign of goodwill as well. So that's that. Number 12, this has to do with us in the Soviet Union. You can write down an acronym. It's called SALT, S-A-L-T, 1, SALT 1, SALT 1, okay? So SALT stands for the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. 1972, we did 2 of these talks. The goal, and by arms we mean nuclear weapons. And so the goal was these talks were to get with Russia to limit the development of nuclear weapons. We have it, they have it, we've got a lot, they've got a lot. We want to limit how many we have out there. So, that's what those talks were about. And this is another part of détente, so we can bring down and tone down the rhetoric of, they're going to drop the atomic bomb on us, and they think we're going to drop an atomic bomb on them. So détente was to release and relax that tension that we have between the two nations. He also goes to visit Moscow, Russia, first president ever to go over there as well. So that also is seen as a measure of goodwill to relax détente, tension between us and the Soviet Union. All right. A couple quick review terms and we're done. Number 13, remember, under the Vietnam War continues under Nixon. His strategy in 1970, early 70s, was Vietnamization. We've heard that before. Vietnamization was to turn the war over to the South Vietnamese. And then my final one here, guys, is Gerald Ford. And Gerald Ford becomes Nixon's new vice president before Nixon resigns. Nixon's former vice president, Agnew, had accepted bribes. And as a result of accepting bribes back in the day, that comes to light. He has to resign, so Ford becomes his president or his vice president as a result of the 25th Amendment. And so that is that. So your assignment, real quick here, guys, there's those questions. I'll wrap up with this. All right. Those questions on LBJ and Nixon. You'll need to have done your Nixon or your LBJ notes with me in that video. You'll need to do these notes, of course, take all that, answer the questions, email me that when you're done. That is due Monday, May, whatever that is. So appreciate it, guys. I'll see you.